Joining us on the Yuma guest line is Brian Peacock, the host of Locked On 49ers. Him and Eric Crocker do a fantastic job. They talk Niners pretty much every day on Locked On. And he's a great follow on X as well. And obviously he's got his KMBR lineage, and he's with us on the Yuma guest line to chop it up on the Niners. Hey, Brian, how are you?
Larry, how you doing, man? I'm doing okay. I had the flu a little bit, so I've been coughing just about every day in February, but I'm starting to feel good, starting to get ready for spring training here, so I'm feeling better.
Good. Now you're a big baseball fan like me, but are you a bigger Niner fan or bigger Giant fan?
You know, with the 49ers stuff, I have some journalistic integrity now, so I feel like I'm more of a journalist as I cover the team, even though I don't write, because writing is homework. I love playing with audio. But I can still just be a fan when I'm watching baseball, and baseball was my first love. You know, I took 1,000 wiffle ball at bats in my backyard as Will Clark. So I'm still much more of a fan when it comes to baseball, and it's much more work when it comes to football.
You sound like me. When I was a kid, growing up in the Sunset, we played strikeout. Right. And so like I would carry in my backpack around with me a big piece of chalk and sometimes a roll of like tape, like electrical tape. And anywhere we would go, we would just, we'd chalk up a strike zone and it was game on, man. And we played a lot of strikeout and it was a great game. You either pitched or you hit. And man, I mean, it was a lot of fun. And I used to sit there in the 70s. And I would, I'm pretending to be Terry Whitfield. I'm pretending to be Billy North. I'm pretending to be Jack Clark. I'm pretending to be, Larry Herndon. I mean, I can just remember those days. My brother would be like, get in the box. Get in the box. Like, wait a second. No, I got to pretend. I got to be Jack Clark. I got to rub dirt on my thigh. I got to twist around. I got to kick out the back of the batter's box. I mean, I just had it all down, but we digress. Hey, the big story of one of the big stories of the day, one of the things that made me laugh on X today, Craig Carton, who's a New York guy, is like, the 49ers are going to sign Aaron Rodgers and they're going to trade Brock Purdy for Myles Garrett. I just start laughing because, I mean, they're not. Why would the 49ers get off of Brock Purdy, who's 25 and is better than Aaron Rodgers right now, for Aaron Rodgers, who's 40 and at the end? And, to me, Aaron Rodgers has regressed significantly. He's not the Aaron Rodgers from a couple years ago. Every time there's a big name, it's like, oh, he's coming to the Niners. And even at quarterback, have people not realized the Niners are not fooling around when they say they're all in on Brock Purdy, but nobody seems to believe them.
Yeah, I will say when it comes to a big name, you can throw the 49ers on the list because they're a team that's going to check in on big names that are available. So when you start talking about Myles Garrett, of course the 49ers are going to check in, and I wouldn't be shocked at all if the 49ers made a move for Myles Garrett. But when you start talking about Aaron Rodgers, and Rodgers specifically, not only does he look pretty washed these days, but do you think Kyle Shanahan and Aaron Rodgers would get along and see eye to eye? Because Shanahan's a control freak. Would he be cool with Rodgers rolling out there and just changing the play call and giving a wink to one of his wide receivers and running different routes that Kyle Shanahan didn't call? I think that would drive Kyle Shanahan crazy. If you said that the equation of Sam Darnold, who's been with the 49ers, plus Myles Garrett and plus what you would get back in trade for Brock Purdy, if that's a better proposition for you, and then you go back and find another young quarterback. I mean, I think Myles Garrett is that good, a Hall of Famer in his 20s. So absolutely, I could see where you could argue that. But Aaron Rodgers, I think, is just more of a big name. And I do think this Brock Purdy contract negotiation, everyone's acting like it's going to get done so easily. But it's like, have you not been paying attention to the 49ers the last 5 years? How is this possibly going to go well? They're quibbling over $1 million with Brandon Ayuk, and that goes deep into August. And he's barely ready to start the season. You think they're going to get a deal done where they might be $10 million a year apart? $10 million a year apart? You think they're going to get that deal done before the draft or before free agency starts? Because it would be the most important thing you could do is probably get it done early. But, man, what about the 49ers negotiations recently makes you think that they would be able to do that? So, to be honest with you, there's been no none of these quarterback contracts have been actual market value. So I think finding market value is just almost impossible these days because you kind of get held hostage by the player because nobody's willing to look behind door number 2 at quarterback. I mean, am I crazy to say that you should do the same thing that you're doing with Deebo Samuel, the same thing you did with Deebo the first time, the same thing you did with Brandon Ayuk last offseason, and let him find out what market value is around the league and allow him to seek a trade, but do it now instead of in August. It might be kind of hot takey, but these guys are big boys. Put your big boy pants on, negotiate, and find out what true market value is, because I don't know what market value is for a quarterback anymore because nobody actually hits the market.
Or how about this? How about just figure out what you're comfortable with and what he's comfortable with and make a deal. Make a deal. Don't be so afraid of the precedent that it's going to set. I don't think he's going to be the highest paid quarterback in the game. I don't. I know Jimmy Garoppolo was, and it seems like all these quarterbacks are. Everybody sets a new and there's a new level, a new ceiling. I don't think Brock's going to set a new ceiling. I think he's going to get paid a lot of money, but I don't think he's going to set a new ceiling. And as far as the Rodgers thing goes, look at the Final Four in the NFL this year. You had Jalen Hurts, Jaden Daniels, Josh Allen, and Patrick Mahomes. What do those guys all have in common? They can all move. They can all run. They can all get away from the rush. You saw when you took Brock Purdy, out and you put in Brandon Allen. Brandon Allen was a sitting duck. He couldn't move at all. And behind the 49ers depleted offensive line, that, being a movement ability and the ability to move away from the rush is almost a prerequisite at this point. I don't know that I would ever want to take a quarterback in today's NFL where, the linebackers are 220 pounds. The edge rushers are 230. There's more and more sacks every year from DBs, a higher percentage of sacks from corners and safeties. You're sending smaller guys at the quarterback. You better be able to move if you're going to play quarterback in the NFL. Brock Purdy's got escapability. Brock Purdy's got a 1-5-4 10-yard split. He can get away from the rush. So can Mahomes. So can Allen. So can Hurts. So can Daniels. But Rodgers can't at this point. I kind of feel like Rodgers, maybe like as of 2 or 3 years ago, was in that mode of like, hey, you know what? I'll stand here, but I'm not going to stand here and take hits. So if my line doesn't stand up, I'm throwing it away or I'm throwing it into the ground. He's not the guy that he was, 5-6 years ago where he could extend plays. He's just not that guy.
No, and we saw it with Kirk Cousins as well. Those guys coming off an Achilles injury and maybe another year removed, they'll move around a little bit better, but their age and that injury, those guys looked really bad last year, both of them. And Kirk Cousins is probably another name you should throw out there when it comes to Kyle Shanahan. But the bottom line is they love Brock, and Brock is a really good quarterback. What's he going to make? I don't know, but the two things that you have to do with a Brock Purdy contract is you got to get it done now. You got to get it done soon, and you got to, whether it's structure or years or dollars or whatever it is, you still have to be able to build a really good team around Brock Purdy. Because if you look at the roster potentially in 2027, and there's no Trent Williams most likely, and Debo's going to be gone, and Hufanga's going to be gone, and Greenlaw's going to be gone, and Christian McCaffrey, he's at that age of running backs and coming off of 2 pretty nasty injuries himself. He should probably, even if he's healthy, probably not carry the load. You can't give him the ball 25 times a game. And so you start looking at what that team would look like in 2027. Well, it's not that different than what the broken down, injured 2024 49ers roster looked like. And Brock wasn't able to elevate that roster. So you need to have enough money to operate. And it's a very different proposition having a $900,000 quarterback and having a $55 to $60 million quarterback. So as long as they can still operate and still do things like bring in star players and pay someone like, say, Myles Garrett if he's willing to come to San Francisco, and I think they have the best draft pick of all the quote-unquote contending teams that he might want to go to. They're in the right conference for the Browns to send him to. I think the 49ers have a great shot at Myles Garrett. And so you have to be able to bring in players like that if they're available. You need to be able to build around Brock Purdy, and you got to get the deal done pretty soon. And will the 49ers be able to pull off both of those things? I don't know. It's a big ask based on all their recent negotiations.
Yeah, we'll get to Garrett in a second because I think he's also an interesting study. But, Albert Breer was on today with Rich Eisen, and he kind of laid it out and said, and I don't know who his source is, but he says that that he doesn't think Brock's going to be the highest paid quarterback, that he thinks the two sides will find middle ground, that ultimately Brock will not set a new ceiling for quarterbacks, and that he expects it to be between, in the $50 million range. And then he actually named Jared Goff and said that Goff's deal is the template for Purdy's deal, which is interesting because Goff signed for 4 years and $212 million in May of 2024, $53 million average annual value. And if you account for, 1 year of inflation, let's say, because it's a new year, that would put Purdy's average annual value at 56.4, which is pretty much in line with what Diana Rossini reported Super Bowl week, that ultimately the AAV would come in between 55 and 60 million. So if by chance Breer's right and it's a Goff-like deal, are you happy with that? Are you satisfied with that? Kawakami suggested it might not be a long-term deal. It might be a little bit of a shorter-term deal. Shanahan came out the other day and said that Purdy, Purdy's going to be the quarterback as long as he's the head coach. I thought that was kind of an interesting comment. But what do you think? If Purdy's deal is the Goff deal 2.0, is that you like that deal or no?
I guess so. It's just the economics of the NFL is kind of crazy because there's just no middle class of quarterback money. There's no reason a guy like Brock Purdy should be making $900K, but man, making $56 million a year, that just seems like a lot. But again, maybe it's short. Maybe, depending on how many guarantees you have there, can you restructure it later? Can you get out of it if it doesn't look good in a couple of years? If you're not able to build much of a roster around him, as long as you can still operate and build the type of team the 49ers need to build around Brock Purdy, then I'm okay with it. Whatever the dollar is, maybe it's structure, maybe it's guarantees, but I do start to get a little bit like, in reality, in my opinion, Brock Purdy should be making more like $45 million a year. That's just the way I look at it. I think he'll get more
that's
than
what
that.
Mahomes is making. That's what Mahomes is making AAV, but the total deal for Mahomes is like $400 million.
Right, and then you're going to have someone like Josh Allen pretty soon that's going to start making, $70 million probably, and they're going to start getting passed up with some of these contracts, and the salary cap's going up. So maybe the 49ers would say, look, the way this thing's structured, it's not going to affect anything. We can pay him a lot of money. It's going to look big, but we can still operate and do everything else we need to build around him. But that's the big worry. As long as you can still build a really good team around him and pay big time players, and you get the deal done soon, then I'm okay with the dollar amount. But it just seems a little dubious that you can structure away $200 million of a guaranteed contract if it's indeed like a 4 or 5 year deal close to $60 million. I mean, it's a little bit more difficult to structure that away.
Okay, let's talk Myles Garrett for a second, because so many people want the Niners to get Myles Garrett. And as much as I'm intrigued by it, who wouldn't be, right? This guy is a monster. I mean, he's 275 pounds. He runs in the 4.5s. He's 14 sacks a year, almost every year. But I don't know that the Niners can acquire him. I mean, first of all, you're going to have to beat out everybody else. Second of all, you're going to pay a premium because he's got a really good, friendly $5.6 million year one cap figure. So, you're getting a guy who's very affordable on the cap, meaning that there's a bunch of teams around the league that probably can afford to fold him in. I'm just looking at the Khalil Mack trade from the Raiders to the Bears, and he went for a 2019 first, 24th overall, 2019 sixth, 2020 first, 2020 third, 2020 second, and a 2020 fifth. I mean, that's a lot. That's 2 number ones plus a sixth, a third, a second, and a fifth. So you're giving up 6 picks, including 2 number ones. You know what? If that's the price, and I don't know why Myles Garrett, who's better than Khalil Mack, why that would be less. I mean, Myles Garrett's a total monster at this point, and and as I said, he's got a very friendly cap figure. I don't want to trade 6 picks for Myles Garrett. I don't think the 49ers are in position right now to trade away 6 picks. Not on the heels of Trey Lance, not on the heels of depleting their depth for Hargrave. Both those, they swung and missed on one guy. I love Myles Garrett. I want Myles Garrett. I don't want to trade 6 picks for Myles Garrett, including 2 number ones. Would you trade 2 number ones and 6 draft choices for Myles Garrett?
Yeah, 6 picks would be a little excessive. It would have to be probably pick 11 in this year's draft and not much else. But that's the thing is the 49ers pick at 11 is worth 2 Buffalo Bills first-rounders. It's worth 2 first-rounders from anybody who's drafting late. And so that's where the 49ers, I think, have a huge advantage here. And so for me, if it works out to where it's not 6 picks, it's, Debo plus pick 11 and maybe a third or something like that. Or maybe they want future picks. So, 2 first-rounders, but it's 26 and 27, and the 49ers can move around and maneuver and add more picks from this year's draft if the Browns are looking at quarterbacks in other drafts and they do want future picks. Something like that. And if Myles Garrett chooses the 49ers, and I do think there will be fewer number of teams that are going to be able to bid on Myles Garrett, which might help the 49ers. In most cases, I would say build organically. You need to use the draft picks. The 49ers have kind of created a little bit of a talent vacuum that they're missing some talent that should be on the roster. You mentioned, Hargrave, but man, the 3 first-round picks that they spent to get Trey Lance, they spent a 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th round pick to get Christian McCaffrey. Neither one of those players made an impact for their team last year, and you start to see the lack of talent, especially the first rounders. That's where you draft your offensive tackles. That's why you draft your defensive linemen. And so they're probably not in a position to be giving up a whole bunch of picks, a number of picks, but if a couple picks gets it done, to me, you just say yes because Myles Garrett is that good, and you can get a Hall of Fame guy that's still in his 20s. I mean, he's such a difference maker that, to me, it's if you can get Garrett, you do it, and if you can't, then you go ahead. And so it's almost going to work itself out in a way that, look, if Garrett chooses the Niners, they can make it work, then make it happen. And if you can't get Myles Garrett, then you just see it through with the draft and maybe try to add more picks that way. But certainly the Trey Lance move right away didn't hurt the 49ers. They were able to find Brock Purdy. But, man, missing those 3 first-round draft picks, you start to see it a few years later.
Let's talk a little wide receiver before we get out of here, and that is the Niners are due to pay Deebo Samuel $15.87 million this year. He only got 12% of their offensive touches last year. So, I mean, you can make a really compelling argument that he ain't worth that money, and it doesn't sound like they want him at that money. Sounds like they want to move him. But it was interesting. John Lynch was like, hey, we're not in the business of giving away good football players. So it sounds like they're willing to take maybe a cap hit to trade him instead of, just designating him as a June 1st release and saying goodbye that way and maybe having it be a little bit more favorable on the cap. It seems like they really want some compensation back for Deebo. I just think that even if they get rid of Deebo, you can't go into next year with JJ, Pearsall, Cowing, and cross your fingers that Ayuk's going to not be diminished. I don't think that's a championship caliber receiving core. That's not A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith. And, from what I'm looking at, give me a wide receiver that you think if Deebo is gone, and I believe he is gone, give me a wide receiver that you could bring into this mix that you think could help, because they're going to need somebody.
Ayuk is the big one, because if Ayuk was healthy and you thought he was going to be back and ready to start in week 1, then I'd be okay with that. And that was that's what I thought the plan was when they drafted Ricky Pearsall and paid Brandon Ayuk. That's a first round wide receiver that should be able to be a starting wide receiver and replace Deebo Samuel. And then you got Brandon Ayuk, who's your number 1. Juwan Jennings was your best receiver last year. He's a really good player. He's your number 3. You got Jacob Cowing, and you continue to go through the draft and you get cheaper at wide receiver. I'm totally fine with that. The problem is where is Brandon Ayuk in his rehab, and is he going to be ready? Because that's where you would need a veteran, but you already have a veteran receiver in Deebo Samuel, so he would be the perfect one. You have to pay money just for him to leave. So that restructure they did on Deebo's deal, and it was only a 3-year contract, and I thought it was a natural process of him being somebody that they could trade this offseason. But with that restructure and adding the void years, now they make that a little bit more difficult to move off of him with the salary cap and taking that dead money hit. So maybe they have to just cut him and do the post-June 1 release. But as far as veteran players, I don't know. If you're letting Deebo go, the idea would be you're getting cheaper at wide receiver, and you drafted his replacement with a first-round player. And that should theoretically be enough. And if it's not enough and you do need a veteran player, then I really don't know what the answer is, because now you have to go into your pocket and pay even more money for a team that's doing void years. You're talking about Myles Garrett potentially, and you probably have to do a new deal there. You're trying to bring back Dre Greenlaw and some other free agents. So to me, they drafted a new guy to replace Devo. That should be enough. But you might need a veteran player. Who that veteran player, I can't even put a name out there, because you need a month of a guy to wait for Brandon Ayuk to be back. When's he going to be back? October, November? Is that worth a long-term veteran contract? I don't think it is.
You know, it's interesting. The Niners are 7-1 to go after Devontae Adams. They're 14-1 to land T. Higgins. I don't know. You know, I guess of those two guys, I'd rather have T. Higgins just because he's younger. But I mean, isn't T. Higgins going to get like $30 million a year? To me, it was odd. Mike Lombardi at the Senior Bowl, or at the in Mobile, I believe, said, "Hey, you know what? The sleeper, the talk is here that the Niners could be a sleeper for Higgins." Do you see any way that works?
That doesn't make any sense. I'd be absolutely shocked if the 49ers signed T. Higgins. Why are you paying Brandon Ayuk? He's another X-wide receiver. You know, it doesn't make sense really on any level of T. Higgins going to the 49ers. He's a good player. That's about the only reason why that would make sense. I would much rather spend my money elsewhere.
Last one. Are the Niners, some people said, hey, man, the Niners, you know, last year the Eagles hired Fangio and they turned it all around, and the Niners could be this year's Eagles. And I guess I could see that, but I also could see that the 49ers don't have quite the same talent level that the Eagles had last year, even when they fell short. But what do you see? I mean, a lot of people, you know, hey, is Saleh going to be this year? Is going to be, you know, the Niners equivalent of Fangio, and you just plug him in, have a good off season, and boom, 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 you're back in the Super Bowl mix? Is that how you see it?
It would have to be very heavily due to the gains at special teams coordinator and defensive coordinator if the 49ers are next year's Eagles. And obviously they'd have to have a lot better injury luck, but they had the best injury luck you could possibly have, and they had the best roster you could think of in 2023, and they still fell a little bit short. So it's hard to imagine they're going to have a better team that they fell short with in 2023. And, you know, the older they get, the less likely it is that they're going to be as good with the same players, with guys that are as hurt and getting older, like Trent Williams and Christian McCaffrey. And so they might be a little bit healthier next year, but it's hard for me to imagine unless they just make huge strides. Maybe they hit a home run with pick 11. Maybe they bring in Myles Garrett. But that's kind of the thing where the 49ers are, is they have to make a decision. Are they going all in? Or are they going to just, you know, void years to the gills, put everything on credit cards, spend draft picks to be as good as possible right now in this window and go for another run at it and maybe fall apart like the Los Angeles Rams did and worry about reloading later? Or are they going to go about this organically and try to just continue to build slowly and build through the draft? It's a big offseason for the 49ers, and I have a feeling their aggressive style means they're going to go all in.
Yeah, it's going to be very, very interesting. You know, they've always maintained that they didn't want to be the Rams. They didn't want to have a season that they went for it and then down seasons where they had no chance and they were just kind of cleansing their cap. But we'll see, because there's a lot of pressure on them. They haven't gotten it done. It's year 9 of the regime, and maybe that adds some urgency to the whole mix. Brian, always good to wrap with you, man. Tell people if they want to find you on Locked On, how do they do it? Where's the best way to start and start following you and Crocker and what you guys put out there?
Yeah, find me on the socials at BD Peacock. And we're doing Locked On 49ers daily on the Locked On Podcast Network. You can find it on YouTube or anywhere you listen to your podcasts. And also the Peacock and Williamson NFL show, myself and former NFL scout Matt Williamson, former ESPN guy. We break down the entire NFL on the Locked On Network as well every single day. So sub up to all those.
Thank you, brother. Have a great night. Thanks for jumping on.
Absolutely. Anytime, Larry.